Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Haley Starshak. I'm a content writer here at IANS, and I'm excited to be hosting this week's tech briefing. As a refresher for everybody on the line, the purpose of these briefings is for our rotating cast of IANS faculty to dive into the relevant InfoSec news stories of the week and provide you with specific actionable guidance to take back to your teams. So with that as backdrop, I'm thrilled to be joined today by two of our IANS faculty rock stars, Wolf Goerlich and Jessica Hebenstreit. Wolf is an advisory CISO with prior experience leading IT and IT security in the healthcare and financial services verticals, plus a background in leading consulting and assessment practices. And Jessica is the Senior Director of Corporate Security for Quorum Software, which provides software for the oil and gas industry. Wolf and Jessica, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Okay, let's get started. Today we're going to be covering three stories that have been making the rounds through the industry this past week. First, we're going to be talking about healthcare giant Kaiser notifying millions of its customers about a data breach. And then we'll discuss an actively exploited CrushFTP zero-day vulnerability. And then we'll cover on Brokewell Malware stealing data and taking over Android devices. So interesting topics today. Why don't we get started? Jessica, why don't we start with you? Any initial thoughts on the Kaiser breach? What happened and what was really going on here?
Yeah, so my first thought is, given that the change thing happened this year as well, I cannot believe that this is the biggest breach. First of all, that was just mind-blowing to me, because the change thing was pretty impactful as well. And we know at that point that some of that data has been leaked, despite the ransom being paid. But what happened here, right, is that somehow, and I have, theories and thoughts on how that somehow came about, but somehow some tracking code was placed on the Kaiser Permanente webpage and homepages, right? And so what this was doing, it's like the tracking cookies and that kind of thing. It was looking at how folks were interacting with the website, whether they were logged into their portal, downloading different kinds of information, right? And so, I have to believe there was good intent in this being in there, right? The marketing departments at any major company is going to want to know how the website is being used, where people are clicking, where they're getting the most traffic, that kind of thing. And so I have to believe that the marketing department, had this in place with the best of intentions, if they even knew it was there. However, the problem with these kinds of things is that it can look at your name, your IP address, whether your user account was associated with, a certain name, and what kind of things you were searching for on the website, which can then leak your personal information. Perhaps it's leaking, health concerns that you have and that kind of thing. And so, while this data can be incredibly useful from a business perspective, you have to be really careful, especially when you're in a healthcare setting, financial services kind of setting. This kind of code is common across the web. But when you have a higher responsibility, when you're some of those companies that handle this kind of sensitive data. And so you need to do an inventory of your websites to make sure that this kind of thing is not on there. If you're partnering with other marketing firms that are doing work for you on your website, you need to, make it clear to them that this is not okay to put in there. If you're handling health or PII or financial data, put it in your contracts that this is not, something that's allowed. At the end of the day, I'm not surprised. I think we'll see this. I think other healthcare organizations, especially big ones, should probably look to see if they have the situation going on. But yeah, Wolf, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm just disappointed.
Yeah.
The story is one I'm going to be sharing quite frequently because I have long made the stance that these ideas of engaging in marketing and advertising, this idea that data is the new oil, right, is something that so many organizations have glommed onto. Oh, we are collecting all this rich data. We can make a little bit of extra money on this. We can, increase our profitability on this. I have definitely come to believe that data is the new toxic waste. It just piles up, piles up, piles up, and when it
Mm-hmm.
gets to a certain point, it creates bad outcomes for everyone involved. And this is, to my knowledge, the first major breach that is directly associated with these types of tracking mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something else, Jessica, you said I think is really important there, which is this captured search data. We, and I mean we as in humans, will tell things to a search box that we will not tell to our closest friends, to our spouse, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We are using search to form an opinion, an informed opinion and viewpoint about scary topics when we're thinking about healthcare. And those search results were made public.
Mm-hmm.
And were available along with all sorts of information about who the person, where the person was, by geolocation, what apps they were logged into in terms of the Kaiser Permanente brand. So, step one, Jessica, I think you're spot on. Please, please, please don't collect this data. we need to really be clear about the business risk of which we are incurring when we start tracking and logging everything our users do. Putting aside the very real privacy creep factor.
Yeah.
Another thing, Jessica, and I wanted your opinion on this because, I know this is undoubtedly something that you've wrestled with. This is the largest breach of the year for health records because they're including all the health insurance folks
Mm-hmm.
and all the patients,
Yep.
which gets to a number of 13.4 million. That tells me from an incident response perspective that they have no way of really knowing who was affected.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah. I mean, they can start doing some, oddly enough, analytics on the data to try and match that information up, right? To do notifications. But I think at this case, in this volume, you just kind of have to call it and just notify everyone that potentially you were impacted. I think the level of effort to do that direct matching is just going to be outsized. Spend that time remediating and focusing on other security topics rather than matching up those 13.4 million records, I think.
Right. Yeah, I think you're spot on. But I also think as I start looking at different types of breach scenarios, the who was compromised, the impact statement, the
Yeah.
order of magnitude investigation is something we oftentimes forget, right? Because
Right.
I don't know if there's a breach, I'm going to respond to the breach. But knowing who was breached and how much was breached in this point after the fact, you're right. Like the cost to figure that out is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are an IANS client and you're right now revisiting your IR process, this is a good story to have. If I don't have the ability to really do good deep dive forensics, we have to assume the worst. And the worst
Right.
for Kaiser was 13.4 million.
And this makes a really great tabletop exercise as well, right? Like use this scenario as a baseline for your next tabletop. Put in a couple of injects of, oh, we think it's 1 million records. Oh, it's a day later and we found out it's actually 10 million records. Like, how does that change our response? How does that change our messaging?
Right. Absolutely.
Great points. Thank you so much. Any more thoughts before we move on to the next one?
No, I think that pretty much. Go ahead, Wolf.
I would just say one additional thing for building. You mentioned tabletops,
Mm-hmm.
but if you're building a mobile app or your mobile app is being refreshed or your website is getting updates, this is a good scenario to throw to your red team as well. Can you figure out what data you can get from our analytics engine that might be putting us in a disclosure of loss of sensitive information?
That's a really good point. And I'll add on to that. Your marketing teams aren't doing this on purpose to be naughty and, they have the best of intentions. So, this is also a security awareness opportunity for those, departments.
Yeah, we have long ignored marketing.
Right. They just do stuff.
They do what they do. But from
fine.
like social media accounts to third-party integrations to tracking, there's a lot of stuff currently in the hands of the marketing team that we really should have a good conversation with them.
Yeah, totally agree.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to the CrushFTP vulnerability. Wolf, can you tell us what's going on here? Like, how big of a deal is this? What really is going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I would say for those of you who have long had this argument, I will agree with you. I put criminals exploit, not hackers, because we always oftentimes like interchange those incorrectly. So Crush FTP has this vulnerability. This is not the first time they've had a vulnerability. They've had a very similar remote code execution vulnerability back in November, but they've got this new vulnerability. This vulnerability is basically a combination of server-side template injection. So with the Crush FTP interface, I'm going to do an injection attack. Once I do the injection attack, I chain it onto a virtual file system sandbox escape. So if you recall the way Crush FTP or any of these FTP sites work, they are in a virtual sandbox that eliminates the ability for the people FTPing in and out to see the rest of the file system. Well, there's ability to do a VFS sandbox escape here. So now I've done my injection, I've escaped the sandbox, I load up files onto the Linux host that is running Crush FTP. That allows me to do remote code execution. If the service is running as root, that allows me to do source, the modification of the OS. I can effectively do a complete takeover.
Mm-hmm.
Not a good day for Crush FTP. Now, a couple of things here. One is there is evidence that before this was patched, it was being exploited. So we know that adversaries are taking advantage of these types of attacks. There's a patch now, so put it out. In terms of scope and scale, I was surprised. I'm like, are people still doing FTP? Is that really still a thing? And what's next? Like an IRC exploit? Are we going back to the 90s?
Everything old is new again.
Exactly. So there are some numbers from Shodan and Shadow Server. There's some 5,000 hosts that are publicly facing running this version of Crush FTP. Around 1 to 2,000 were found to be vulnerable. So this isn't a huge issue on the internet, but I do think it's a huge reminder of the impact of these sort of like remote transfer utilities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, this is move it all over again. Do you know if we're running Crush FTP? Do we know where it is?
Do we know if our third-party partners are running Crush FTP? Because remember, like with Move It, the way that British Airways was compromised was actually a third party that was using the data and the service. Yeah.
Right. So do we know not only are we using it, but where in our supply chain might it be?
Yeah. Yep.
That was one thing that was concerning to me. Having that inventory of internet facing utilities, I think, is important. Also, the other side of things is I have long taken the stance that if your security architecture can't withstand someone being phished, it's not a good security architecture. With these types of exploits, who's running FTP service as root? First off, but let's assume you are for whatever reason.
Reasons.
Reasons. if your architecture can't sustain a 0-day exploit in internet facing instances, you're going to have a bad day, right? We need to have more layers than, it's protected because the software's patched, because we know every few months one of these systems is going to have a 0-day exploit.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with everything you're saying, Wolf. And my fear is we see this with Crush FTP, similar to how and I can't believe I'm saying this and bringing it up, but similar how we've seen with Avanti and all of these edge services, right? And we've seen just a deluge of vulnerabilities and problems this year, starting at the end of last year with this. My fear is that we're going to start seeing this with other services similar, right? Because malicious actors are going to see if similar vulnerabilities exist in other similar services like this. And so, be on the lookout. Maybe you're not using CrushFTP, but you're using, another similar service, or your supply chain is using another similar service. So you need to work with, your procurement professionals, on what contracts, from a supply chain perspective and how you're exchanging data with your third-party partners. But I really like the point that Wolf kind of underscored. He didn't say it directly, but asset management, CIS control 1 and 2, hardware and software, right? We need to know what's in our environment so that we can quickly address these kinds of situations. And, it's not the fun, sexy part of security, and we also, tend to become overcome by events. But really, asset management is just so important. And I think we see so many of these kinds of things where we're like, do we have it in the environment? Do our third parties use it? And so it makes it really hard to respond quickly to these things. And so, my big takeaway here is make sure you know what's in your environment and in your supply chain.
And some people find asset inventory very, very fun, very sexy.
Yeah.
Find that person and promote them.
Yes. Give them all of the fringe benefits.
Something you said there, Jessica, I think is worth teasing on. The criminal and the curious are as much driven by trends as the rest of us. Mm-hmm. So it is a common theme in our industry that when a couple exploits in one particular software package or one particular type of software are seen, lots of people get on trend. So we'll certainly see that, which leads me into another thing. I did this at a previous role. We were concerned about FTP and key management in a dozen different ways that we're exchanging files. And I partnered with our dev teams, and I partnered with our traders, and we effectively built one central file exchange function that we managed. It had a few different interfaces, it had a few different things to it, but we managed it as one unit. We secured it as one unit. We monitored it as one unit. And so I say this as, if you're thinking about what to do with this vulnerability, a good conversation with your dev team about, hey, are you trying to launch a project or make investments in your file transfer capability? There may be an opportunity for you to partner with those teams to really centralize, consolidate, and modernize, which will hopefully get ahead of the next one.
Good points. Any more takeaways for clients who maybe don't have CrushFTP, but other things like maybe like the Avanti, where we know things will just keep happening?
Yes, I mean, know what's in your environment, right? So that you can respond quickly to those things. In this case, how are you doing file transfers? How are you exchanging data? How are your customers giving you data? How are you giving data to your partners for payroll, healthcare benefits, all of those kinds of things? Because I do think, as Wolf, rightly said, there will be this jumping on the bandwagon type behavior because this is the latest trend. Maybe they'll start leaving the VPNs alone and switch to FTP. And so, as this seems to be, I expect we'll see more here, and knowing what's in your environment is my big takeaway. Easier said than done, I recognize.
Always. Should we get on to Brokewell?
Yes.
Let's do it. Jessica, would you like to start on this?
Sure. So there's some new malware, maybe not new, discovered by some researchers at ThreatFabric. And it's malware running on Android phones and devices. And so it takes advantage of our messaging as security professionals to apply all of your patches. It looks like a patch. And so using a fake Chrome update, they entice users to download and install this malware. And once it's installed, the malicious actors can remotely see the device's screen where you're touching and swiping. They can click on items, capture messages, and that kind of thing. It looks like there's a particular threat actor that is kind of spearheading or behind this whole thing. they've been active for a number of years on the dark web with, selling stolen credentials, other related tools like this. And so, a couple of takeaways here is, if you're going to allow personal Android devices for like a BYOD kind of environment, make sure you're doing MDM. Make sure that Play Protect is enabled. That's an additional layer of security here so that, folks aren't putting fake updates on their phones. And really, this one's a hard one for me to message, but a lot of MFAs use SMS tokens, right? Now, my messaging has always been if the only thing you can do for an MFA is SMS, right? Then at least you're still doing MFA at that point. And I know, Wolf is much more well-versed in this space than I am, but this is an instance where that SMS MFA token can fail you, right? Because the malicious actors have access to your phone and those SMS messages. Whereas, with an authenticator app or something like that, those switch over so quickly, they may not be able to then intercept that. And so, move away from those SMS messages for MFA wherever you can. What do you think, Wolf?
So first off, just a quick story on this. When the news broke and when I was preparing for this briefing, I reached out to a good friend of mine who's a CISO, and I was like, hey, by the way, I know you've been struggling with like getting your BYOD program in play, getting your MDM in play. Would it help to share that someone can completely take over an Android phone, including reading, clicking buttons, accessing all data?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, can you share that with me? I got a message yesterday after his all hands. He's like, great news. We're finally making progress on the BYOD program. So, there is this sense that, if it's a mobile device, it's safe. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
Right. And that was true for a period of time because all the badness was on Windows devices. But as we've seen a shift towards people using mobile devices for so much of their workflows, more and more malware is going to come out like this. So I do think everything you said is spot on. A good MDM program is important. There was a question, can this malware be installed if you don't allow apps outside the Play Store? My understanding is no, it can't. That gets back to some of the Android settings that can lock down a device and prevent this type of malware from running. It also reminded me a little bit of like the old school Zeus on mobile, right? Zitmo, in terms of like,
man, throwback.
classic, exploration and exploitation of a mobile device. So yeah, mobile device management, Android security, as was talked about with some of these settings. Security awareness training, Jessica, I think you bring up a really good point. Like, we tell people, apply your patches. Of course, adversaries are going to be like, here's a patch, please apply.
Right.
Can
you talk a little bit more about the MFA and the SMS codes?
Yeah, so this type of malware can read any of your text messages. If your codes are going in via text message, if your one-time passwords are going in by text message, you can immediately compromise. And as a matter of fact, this is one of the ways, this is why I was thinking about Zitmo. This is one of the threat vectors that they used to do all the time with Zeus on mobile, which is log in, compromise the device, wait for the text message to come in, read it, throw that into the interface and log in. You really need to be moving towards FIDO2, which is phish resistant, which will resist these types of artifacts, does not require human intervention, does not come across a way that can be read off an Android phone. So, yes. Did that hit it?
I think so. I don't have anything else to add on this one, but I think we have some time. Are there questions?
Yeah, we got a question in the chat. What are your thoughts about the EU push to mandate the ability to have alternative app stores, especially with the context of this story?
I think if it has the same controls that we see through Play Protect, It'll be fine. I'm not exactly sure on this EU push. Is it saying that to allow alternative app stores outside of the normal Apple
Yeah.
and Google? Oh, okay. They're going to have the same level of controls and security protections as we have with the Apple Store and the Google Play Store, which one of the reasons we don't typically allow these alternative app stores is because they don't and leave you open to this malware ridden, applications. So, generally, I think the EU tends to be, on the leading edge of things, from a privacy and security perspective. This one, I think they might be missing the mark.
Yeah, I think that the main push here is to foster competition, right? Is to get away from the walled garden. And yeah, I get it, right? We all know the downsides of a closed ecosystem. However, the more options there are, the more likelihood of someone choosing the wrong option and the more likelihood of one of those options being compromised. So, we'll see how this plays out, but I would agree with the general gist that if we allow those open stores and if we allow direct sideloading of applications, we're going to see more malware like this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another question was, is there a similar vulnerability for iPhones? I haven't seen one, not similar to this. Now, obviously, you can still get an iPhone compromised and infected, but I haven't seen a complete takeover like this. Have you, Jessica, for iPhones?
I have not, but that doesn't mean it isn't out there waiting to be discovered. So I agree. I haven't seen a complete takeover like this. Android kind of tends to be the one where you hear these, and I say this as an Android user. You kind of tend to see this more with Android, but that's why you shouldn't be using those alternative Play stores and that kind of stuff.
As an Android user, there's one question here about good apps for capturing network traffic on Android. I would just say Wireshark in Android, but is there other ones that are out there that are in the air these days?
I don't know. This isn't an area that I dive into, honestly.
Wireshark.
Yeah, Wireshark. Love Wireshark.
Stick with the classics.
Yeah.
Stick with the classics. It's there's lots of training out there. There's lots of support out there.
Awesome.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Especially it's like, here's a free hacking tool. Please install this. Honest, it's great.
Wink, wink.
Totally. Well, any final comments on any other stories?
I don't have any. I'm looking forward to RSA next week. So if you see, the short lady with blue hair walking around, don't be afraid to say hi. Stop me and say hi.
That's a great shout out. I know we got a lot of different IANS events going on throughout RSA. I'll try to attend as many of those as I can.
Same.
When are you presenting, Jessica?
I'm not presenting officially. I'm volunteering, and I will be at the various IANS events as well as you'll see me all over the conference. So.
Awesome.
Well, if anyone wants to hear about the human factors of risk, I'll be presenting Thursday morning, so early Thursday morning. Like that's when you want to be hearing about risk management. Is like break of dawn
first
on the
thing.
last day of RSA.
Yeah. That's rough. Sorry, friend.
It'll be great.
Maybe I'll be assigned to your room. I'm doing a shift that day. So
awesome. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good time at RSA, and we'll see you next week.
All right.
Take care.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.